Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming down on this very special night. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida, so a quick reminder for our internet audience at home, if at any time during the presentation you would like to purchase a copy of tonight's book, just call the number on your screen. We will have the author sign it for you, and we will get it shipped to wherever you are in the United States free of charge. This evening, Books and Books is very happy to present Ms. Rebecca Miller and her new novel, Jacob's Folly. Tonight, Ms. Miller is going to be in conversation with our special guest, independent film producer Jessica Berman. And here to introduce our guest, please welcome to the microphone a good friend of Books and Books. He is the director of the Coral Gables Art Cinema right across the street from us, Mr. Robert Rosenberg.
I see a lot of familiar faces out there. Is there anybody in this audience who's not been to our theater across the street? Okay, nobody wants to admit it. Okay, you've all been there, so we won't pitch the theater. There's information, calendars over there. If you want on the way out, you can get them. I'm just going to introduce Jessica and let Jessica introduce Rebecca more. Jessica Hubert Berman is a big friend of the cinema and colleague of mine. I'm so excited to have her do this event with us, with our colleagues here at Books and Books. She's a South Florida native and a Cuban-American film and television producer who has split her time between Madrid in Spain and Miami. She has most notably worked as a producer for a number of films from the Spanish filmmaker Fernando Trueba, including on La Niña de tus Ojos, Calle 54, and El Baile de la Victoria, and for his brother and filmmaker David Trueba, including such films as Soldados de Salamina, and most recently, Madrid 1987, which we were honored to play at our theater a year and a half ago. She currently heads Newstead Films, producing features and television with international profiles. Amongst those projects is Colombian director Andy Baez's Domestic Animals, a film based on the novel of the same name, to be shot in Miami. And thanks to Books and Books and Christina Nosti for organizing this event. And now, Jessica and Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. I'm grateful to Books and Books for the opportunity to have this conversation with Rebecca and for their commitment to the community as a cultural nexus and for their staying power as an independent bookseller, which really means a lot these days. Thank you.
Yeah.
Rebecca Miller is an enormously talented novelist, film director, and screenwriter. She trained and worked as a painter and actress, experiences very much in evidence in her films and her writing. She has written and directed the films Angela and Personal Velocity, 3 Lives, based on her own short story collection, winner of the Sundance Grand Jury Prize and Cinematography Award, as well as the John Cassavetes Independent Spirit Award. She has also written and directed The Ballad of Jack and Rose and The Private Lives of Pippa Lee, based on the novel of the same name. Her most recent work is Jacob's Folly. This book tells the interwoven story of Jacob, an 18th century Jewish peddler in Paris who is reincarnated in Paris as a modern-day fly with supernatural abilities. He gets into the heads of Louis, a volunteer fireman, family man, and all-around do-gooder, and Masha, a young Orthodox Jewish woman. This fly wills them to do what he wants, straying far from their courses. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Jacob's Folly is extremely imaginative and entertaining. A reincarnated fly is the omniscient narrator. I was reminded of Kafka and Isaac Bashevis Singer. What inspired you?
Well, a few things inspired me. When I realized that Masha was going to be a Jewish woman living in Long Island, I started reading up on contemporary Jewish literature being written by Hasidic women in particular I was interested in, because I wanted her to be an ultra-Orthodox. At first I thought a Hasidic Jew. And then I realized that I had a connection to a very Orthodox family that were living in the same manner as a Hasidic family, but not in Yiddish, which was going to be a help to me because I didn't speak Yiddish. And then, so in part, I was inspired by Jewish folklore. And in part, there was this one story that I read as I was developing the story, which was about Leslie Sensatimore, the fireman, and Masha Edelman. That was written by a woman who had written a book called Better Laugh Than Cry. She was a Hasidic lady living in Canada. And it was a story of her daughter who had grown up, her grown-up daughter, who was being pursued by a fly all day long. And she kept swatting it away in the story. And in the story, the daughter says, I wonder if it's a soul doing penance for its sins. And as I was reading it, I thought, is there reincarnation in Judaism? And I didn't know it. And I discovered, in fact, that there's something called Gilgul, which is the reincarnation of Jewish souls. And
what's that concept? I know the fly mentions it at one point.
Yes, it's the concept of, it's an interpretation of, in Kabbalah, of a certain passage in the Torah and the interpretation is that souls are recycled and come back in order to do, and sometimes they can come back as animals. And when I asked my family that I had become they were sort of my mentors in Long Island, in the Five Towns, they said, oh yeah, Gilgul. It was a completely normal concept for them and something that was part of their lives, in fact. And in Bolshevik Singer, you often see cats who are possessed,
right.
Little creatures, spiders. And so I had a sense that there was always a triangle involved, that it was Leslie, the volunteer fireman, Masha Edelman, the sort of gorgeous young Jewish woman, and a kind of supernatural or element. And then I realized that it was a fly, and then I thought, where does he come from? And I decided on Paris, 18th century Paris, for various reasons.
Is he inherently evil? What is it that motivates him and makes these people do these things and stray from their course?
I don't think that Jacob is evil. I think he is he has a shaded soul, I would say, and he has a lot of trouble with authority, which makes his relationship with God quite problematic. And so, in part, he feels slighted by God to have made him into a fly. Mm-hmm. And so he decides to do the best he can to kind of do what would really piss God off, and that's really what most of the book is about.
Okay, I love the voice of the fly is so funny and original. I love when he describes his appetites, especially towards food and sex. There's a few passages that I would love if you could read.
Yeah, of course.
One is the initiation of his sex life.
Yeah, I mean, it should be... Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, we have to set it up a little bit, which is that he has just figured out that he's a fly.
Right.
And he thought he was an angel, so this is a very bad moment for him. And he kind of awakens in the darkness and comes down to see the suburban neighborhood in Long Island. He's completely confused. He latches onto Leslie Sensatimore, who's this volunteer fireman, and comes with him to the hospital where Leslie is visiting a man that he saved from a fire. And he only visits him because it's somebody he knows from his childhood. And Jacob is so incredibly bored by the man's goodness that he decides to just sort of wander around this hospital. And he's still completely baffled about, modern life and lights and televisions and all the rest of it. And he comes into this room and he sees this girl who's in a hospital bed, who's Masha Edelman, and she's this beautiful young woman. And he falls in love with her. And he imagines still that he's an angel, but he thinks he's invisible because she's paying no attention whatsoever to him. And he alights on a mirror. And he suddenly realizes that he might be casting a shadow. And then he sees that, in fact, he's a fly. So it's a very bad moment. So that's where we are right now. We're in the hospital room with him. he thinks, "Oh, where are the dark angels?" I thought loftily, that I might join ranks with them to overflow the old despot, meaning God. I turned and looked over at Masha, who was sleeping now, having guzzled from the box of light and its world of temptations all night long. That's the television. Her beauty was a torture. I noticed another fly, smaller than me, and, I intuited, a female, drinking from a droplet of orange juice on the rim of Masha's glass, just at the place where my girl's lips had left a perfect impression. I took off and alighted on the edge of the glass, just behind the female, a petite, glossy fly recently hatched. Her smell was delicious, a cocktail of candy, orange juice, and excrement that filled me with straightforward lust. Never having done this before, I felt somewhat insecure, yet I needed above all to conquer something, someone, today of all days. Without thinking, I assertively leapt on the female. She took off. Terrified, I held on desperately, my forelegs clasping her face as she looped through the air, trying to shake me off. I was amazed to feel my penis emerge from within my body like a turtle's head and craftily enter her as she bucked and twirled beneath me, my little legs clamped around her hairy trunk. The wind whipping at my eyes, I stared at Masha's sleeping face. Masha woke now, as if stirred by my desire, and blinked slowly. She smiled, curious, mildly entertained at the sight of two copulating flies looping randomly through the air like a pricked balloon. The fact of my beloved girl watching me as I fucked was so erotic to me that pleasure infused me without warning, and I ejaculated violently, my whole tiny body racked with what felt like a life-threatening explosion of sweetness inside me. The female, unlocked, buzzed off as I, barely able to beat my wings, landed heavily on the windowsill, dizzy and slightly nauseous. In all my years of sensual excess, I had never had an experience close to this. I felt a tightness in my abdomen and at the end of my back. For the first time since my arrival in the sublunar world, I relieved my bowels, dropping a string of feculae along the window ledge, infinitesimal dots aligned like the 3 periods used to open up a sentence to a chasm of uncertainty. ...
It should be mentioned that those ... dots appear in the book exactly as they're described in descending size order. So,
yeah, I was very specific about my dots.
And the other section that comes to mind about the fly's appetite is when he's at the Shabbat dinner. And he's describing the food and landing in a drop of gravy and the pleasure that he gets from that.
Do you want me to read it?
Could you?
Well, yeah, and I'll just explain that having fallen in love with Masha, he's decided to go home with her, and spends a good few days in the Edelman household, sort of pining after Masha. But this is so this is Shabbat table. And Mordecai is her father. The shaggy, fur-hatted Mordecai stood up at the tip of his beautifully set table, 21 heads turned in his direction, and chanted the Kiddush, a brimming silver cup of wine in his hand. Once he had finished, he took a careful sip of wine, then poured a few drops, sadly cut with apple juice, into everyone's glass. I realized grimly that I had landed in a family of teetotalers. They all took a gulp of the pathetic concoction. Then Pearl and the girls got up briskly to set out the feast. French roast beef, pistachio-stuffed chicken breasts, salmon roulade, gefilte fish with horseradish, quinoa salad, fruit and lettuce salad, potatoes in mustard sauce, roasted garlic, hummus, baba ganoush, blueberry cobbler. 2 of Pearl's sweet loaves of challah were nestled beneath their embroidered crimson velvet coverlet like dew-covered manna. It was paradise. With a shudder of pleasure and surprise, I stepped into a droplet of gravy and tasted the rich, salty fat through the pads in my feet. In a trance of sensory overload, I strolled from one luscious crumb to another, sometimes even flying to a serving dish to drink from the rim, knowing full well that my hosts were forbidden to kill anything, even flies, on the Sabbath. These people were not even allowed to wash lettuce after Friday sundown, lest they kill the bugs hidden in the leaves. I was completely safe. They shooed me away several times, of course, but nobody dared swat me. Ali Shaya's husband, Yitzhak, a humorist, even quipped, "He's a Jewish fly. He knows we can't kill him today." I laughed at that joke along with the rest of the party.
I love that. And there's so many more passages like that. The fly's voice is just incredible, incredible, and very successfully developed.
Thank you.
Another issue is assimilation, which is something that affects both Jacob and Masha. He's initially offered an opportunity to leave the Jewish community, and he declines at first, although he later succumbs. And Masha secretly wants to be an actress. Is belonging to a group in conflict with the search for self-identity for these characters?
Well, I think for these two particular characters, yes. But for very specific reasons. In the case of Jacob, he is escaping a marriage to a hysteric, that a teenage marriage to a real hysteric who's really quite mad. And so the only way of getting out of it really is to escape his family. And also he's kind of doesn't really feel he belongs in some way. He's a little bit of a black sheep already in his family. Masha, her problem is really that she has a deep desire to perform and to sing, and singing in front of people who she's not related to isn't allowed in her home. She takes acting classes secretly, and she ends up really having to make a choice. One thing I did find that when I started out writing this book, I really didn't understand, I'd say, especially the women in the Orthodox communities. I was looking at them and thinking, I just don't get it. I don't understand this life. I don't understand the choice. I don't understand covering your head and wearing really thick stockings on, in the hottest day of the year in New York. And as I got to know more and more about them and stay with this family and learn more, I really actually gained a huge respect for the way of life, even as I also had differences with it, and I see the dark side of it and all the rest of it. I felt like, and I think that the way that it's rendered in the book is beyond respectful, because I actually kind of fell in love with it a little bit, even though it's also impossible for Masha and impossible for one who doesn't fit in to that. But one who does, I think it can give a lot of comfort.
There was that great scene where she breaks into song that was actually a prayer within the confines of the home, but in front of the men, her father and her brothers who were there, and that just caused a stir. Everyone was just shocked.
Right, because she was also in front of people she wasn't related to, and that's actually right after the that I just read. It's at that same Shabbat table.
I was reminded in the Private Lives of Pippa Lee, where Pippa Lee is brilliantly played by Robin Wright, and she undergoes a similar transformation. After a chaotic youth, she finds stability playing the perfect wife to a man 30 years her senior, played by Alan Arkin, and her world falls apart when she discovers that he's having an affair with one of her friends. Ultimately, the situation frees her, and she can aspire to something that she may have originally. Are there parallels between her transformation and what happens to Jacob and Masha, in a sense, of somehow breaking free of some?
Well, I do think that. I mean, I don't think that I was consciously making parallels, of course, but, I think that there was the notion of escape is always there in my books and my stories, that there is usually some radical escape involved for whatever reason. So I do think that that's true, and that also the struggle with the past is very much in all of those stories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The process of writing a novel is so different from the process of making a film. You write a novel, it's a very solitary experience. Filmmaking certainly isn't.
Yes.
Writing a novel ends once the written word is on the page, and that's really where filmmaking begins. Writing a novel doesn't require any financial resources. Filmmaking most certainly does. How do you travel between both worlds and balance that?
Well, for me, I was originally trained as a painter, so I began, and I always wrote, though, as well. So filmmaking just seemed like the perfect joining of painting and writing to me. And I think that for me, that writing is creating a complete world, a hermetic world, and you have control over that world, and it's beautiful, but it's a very lonely occupation. And in a way, it can drive you crazy. I mean, it took me 5 years to write this book, and it was very, very intensive experience in terms of learning and writing. And then with a filmmaking experience, in a way, directing is lonely because you're the one who's really finally responsible in a way for the story.
It comes back to you through in the editing process. In a sense, I've heard directors say that.
But yet, it's also intensely collaborative, and I love to work with people, and I love to see what other people can bring. You know, you give a few lines to an actor, and then they take it and they turn it into something so much more, and they flesh it out in a certain way. And so there's a great beauty to that. So for me, I think the two things mirror each other, you know, and kind of complement each other very well.
The way that the chapters and stories are juxtaposed and ordered in Jacob's Folly, jumping across time and place, is cinematic in a sense, reminiscent of the way that you might use flashbacks in Pippa Lee. What was that process like? I know there's a photograph inside Jacob's Folly taken by your son Ronan, who's here, in which you appear in front of a board with a zillion note cards that appear to have color dots and a certain system that you've set up.
Yes.
And it does become quite complex, especially towards the end of this book. But it's very subtle and beautifully done, and there's meaning that comes out from that juxtaposition. How was that process? How did that develop?
Well, I mean, the way that it was quite difficult because the three strands, and it's all of the book, and also the element of it, in a way, it's a kind of misguided love story. I mean, in a way, both of these men, Leslie Sensatamore and Jacob, are in love with Masha, and Masha is kind of the spiritual heart of the book in a way. So, how to get the balance of the three characters so that it would feel like breathing, like you were ready to go into the other story when you got when you ended a chapter and it was time to change. That was hard. So what I ended up thinking was I just need to see the whole thing like a painting almost. So I put it all on the wall, every single scene of the book, and then I color coded them all in terms of the story strand, and I created a kind of not an exact symmetry, but at least a kind of balance, so that it looked balanced. And then I broke the book down that way in a more arbitrary way, and then I started subtly, changing it in terms of exactly what words should end chapters and stuff. But it was doing the visual book, the visual part of it was very, very important for me.
Have you thought of turning this into a film?
No, I haven't. I mean, I have thought about it, but it just doesn't seem like I want to make it into a film. Like, I feel like the reason that I made Personal Velocity and The Private Lives of Pippa Lee into films is that I felt like I was still hungry in a way. Like, I still wanted to go, further in some way, like in another dimension. And with this book, I feel sated for some reason. Maybe in years to come, or maybe someone else will do it. I don't know.
How would you feel about that? About someone else adapting it?
I would welcome it at this point. I think maybe some years ago I might not have, because I might have been more possessive of it. But I think I'm just changing in that way. I would be quite happy. Maybe not this book, because I frankly think it would be quite hard to make this book into a movie, but I would like somebody to make one of my things into a movie.
Okay. And have you thought of directing something that is not an original work, your script?
Well, I'm doing something next. I'm directing something next, which is based on someone else's book. Okay. But I wrote the screenplay, so that's as close as I've gotten so far.
You've done. I saw you had done that for Proof as well, right?
I did write. Yeah, I did write. Based
you adapted
on
another
screenplay,
screenplay,
and that was was something where I was hired to do it, and I was happy to do that. I haven't yet read the screenplay where I think, oh, okay, I can make when it's completed, because usually screenplays feel like it's too late, like the train has left the station. But I am actually right now doing something where someone else is adapting their own book for me, but I'm very involved with the adaptation. So it's kind of like step by step, and that will be a big step for me, because I've never done that, but I'm actually really excited, because it'll be more pure directorial experience. Because I've kind of like directing and writing have been so intermeshed for me all these years, and I think it'll be quite healthy for me to.
What is that called? Can you tell us the name?
No, it doesn't have a title. That one's really just the one I'm doing next is called Maggie's Plan. That's one.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's about it's basically about a young woman who thinks that she can kind of control her own life, and in fact, she finds out that she can't, basically, and is a really boiled down version. It's with Greta Gerwig is going to play the main part, and Julianne Moore.
Great.
Two ones we know.
Right. Who was so brilliant in, well, her brief appearance in Pippa Lee.
Oh, isn't she
it's
great?
wonderful.
Oh,
yeah.
she was hilarious. We had to shoot all night long, so we shot one day and one night, and then she went off and had to go to her son's guitar recital or something, and it was like it was very funny because she was playing a kind of grumpy lesbian pornographer, and then off she went to go and
Mom.
be mom. Yeah.
You're such a strong artist with a compelling, unique voice and masterful storytelling and visual technique. You're also the daughter of Arthur Miller and Inga Morath and the wife of Daniel Day-Lewis. How has this influenced you as an artist?
Well, to start with my mother, I think my mother was hugely influential for me as a visual artist, which because she took me to museums and talked to me all the time about the power of triangles, which I'm still talking to my son about all the time, and in composition. And she was a hugely influential. I think it's very hard to tell how much our parents have influenced us and how much we are ourselves. I think the thing that influenced me a great deal also is just the fact that they just got on with it. They were workers. We didn't have, I didn't understand the whole thing of just not doing anything on Sunday. Or, like having days where you did nothing was, to me, I didn't understand. Because we just, the family just, we all just worked. And I understood that your work, you just kept going with it and until you were finished. And I think being a worker, when nobody's telling you have to work, is a great thing to learn. And that's a very difficult thing for a lot of artists to learn.
What are your writing habits? Do you write daily?
When I'm writing something, really, I would write daily. Yeah, and I definitely think it's like playing the piano. I mean, in a funny way, because it is a coordination thing. Unless you're writing longhand, which it still is, I suppose. But I mean, like in terms of the speed of thinking, getting the thinking into your fingers, you have to get almost back into shape for it after if you haven't done it for a long time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I write every day, and depending on what my duties are, like if I have to pick up my kids from school and things like that, I stop when I have to do that. But I try to work. I work in the mornings particularly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll open it up to the audience now if anyone has any questions. Yes.
You're very visual, obviously, and all of us wanted to be a fly on the wall. How about turning the book somehow and the fly into a children's literature where you can illustrate?
This book?
Well, not everything.
Yeah, I don't think it would be a very good. Well, actually, somebody once suggested, and I think this might be really interesting to do it almost like The Fantastic Mr. Fox. I don't know if anyone saw that movie, but that technique where it would all be done in these, not with real humans. And actually, that's a very interesting idea. When I think about what it would take to do that, I just want to lie down right now. But maybe one day when I've recovered.
A children's series where a bee or a fly is a friend to my grandson.
Yeah, no. Yeah, you definitely wouldn't want to have your grandson reading this book, but still, maybe something else.
That's another question.
I'm just interested in knowing more about your background as a painter. Can you say something?
Yeah, I mean, I went to Yale as a painter. Then I started showing sort of soon after that. My paintings were, I painted on, I worked with triptychs a lot that were 3 pieces that would close up like in the shape of a house, sort of like altarpieces from 15th century altarpieces, but I was working very much from my own dreams. And so, and they were quite thick paint that was carved into a lot. So there was a lot of pattern and these little figures, and they were sort of primitive in a way. I like them. Looking back on it, I wish I hadn't sold any of them, because I thought I would make more, and I ended up not doing that. I always thought that was going to be my whole life. But I was very interested in dreams, and I still am. And in fact, most of my most of my films have some kind of dream element in them, still now. Yeah.
You talked about finding the balance of the structure of the book. Well, I was wondering what was the hardest part of creating it for you, and what was the best part?
Well, probably the hardest part was getting the structure so that it was really right. I mean, because it was one thing when it was sort of almost right, and then my publisher, when about a year before I finished the book, I thought I was finished. I thought it was like a month away, and I gave it to him, and he had read it a couple of times before, and he said, well, I just think that we need to see Leslie Senza-Tamore 3 more times. But in order to do that, I had to restructure the entire book. I had to take all my cards and and it took a year. It took a year to just get, and then of course, once I started restructuring, I started realizing that there were certain passages that weren't so great, and I really wanted every single sentence in this book to be really good. And so I went back and I rewrote the whole thing, read it out loud to myself infinite times to get the rhythms right. The great joy for me was really Jacob's voice, because as you were saying, he really was, it was like getting him through my fillings. There was just something, was just coming through. And I loved that experience of writing him. It was very liberating too, because he's so naughty. He's really naughty, and he has no guilt, which was really nice for me, because I definitely have a lot of guilt. and so he was just a kind of guilt-free man who was, and I'll call him amoral, but not, he isn't an evil person. He's just like, and so in a way it was very freeing to kind of inhabit this other creature for such a long time. That was a really freeing thing. I enjoyed actually the research of it, because it was like, I haven't learned that much since I was in college. I mean, what my level of knowledge was when I went into writing the book and when I came out was the enormous difference.
How did you mentioned your the family that you became acquainted with.
Yes.
What other type of research did you do, especially about Paris in the 18th century?
Well, I did a huge amount of reading, and I had a very good research assistant who was a graduate student and had a lot of access to, for example, the life in the theaters in 18th century Paris, and things like the plans of the theater, like literally the architectural plans of one of the theaters that I was, so all sorts of little nitty-gritty things like that. And I also was in communication with some scholars. I had a couple of rabbis look it over carefully, combing it through. There was occasionally something that nobody could give me an answer to, which was interesting because, Jewish life in Paris, there were only about 250 Jews in Paris at that time. So it was a tiny community that really left no trace of itself. No one was writing a history about these people. The most useful document that my research assistant found me was Inspector Bureau, who is in fact a character in the book, was a man who was in charge of Jewish affairs in Paris at that time. And he left an exhaustive list of every Jew in Paris, what his character was, or hers. They're mostly men at that time, what their job was, and where they lived, and how long the passport was that he had given them. Because every Jew had to have papers. Like, you couldn't be in Paris if you were a Jew without papers, and you had like 3-month passport was really the most you could get. And then you would leave and come back. And so most of the population early on was itinerant. They were itinerant people who would stay in a certain little quarter in Paris, and then they would leave, and then they would come back. So Bureau became a character in the book. He was such a. I could just feel him coming through his little writing. Yes.
Well, first of all, I have so many questions, but I won't ask all of them. You said you went to Yale to study painting. But you always wrote. So did you study writing, or was it did you just ingest it from growing up in the home you grew up in, or did you mean to write?
Well, I studied writing a little bit when I was in college. I did take one course particularly. But I had always written short stories. Also in high school, I started a little literary magazine. I was always interested in writing. And I find the best education for writing is reading. And I did read a lot. I always read a lot. When I first started writing, when I wrote my short story collection, Personal Velocity, I had a friend, Honor Moore, who's a poet, who actually read the stories and gave me notes on my first stories, and her basic note was just that slow down, because I was so used to with screenwriting, it's all about in a way, what's the plot and what's happening. And she said, just open up the senses. And once I started doing that, I really started to enjoy sensory kind of writing. And this book is is a very sensuous book in that sense. But that was the main lesson that I had to learn when I started to really write fiction for itself.
Experience of your husband playing John Proctor, which was the character your father created, and did you inform any of that, or were you back in the corner just watching it all?
Well, I didn't know him then. I only met him right after that. Yeah, I met him right after that, so I didn't know him then. But I almost met him then, but I didn't.
It was Bashir.
Yeah. It was Bashir. Yeah. Yes.
Do you find that your painting has influenced your writing?
Yes, there's no question that it's all one thing. And I do believe that all the arts are very interconnected. It's just that it takes so long to master one art that it's very hard to do more than one thing. And that's one of the reasons I feel that I sort of bloomed or matured as an artist sort of late compared to what some people might, because I was trying to get good at more than one thing at once. But yeah, I would say that it has. I mean, I was always very interested in our relationship with the divine in a way, which is partly, even though this book is certainly, I would say, is a comic novel in a sense, but it deals with rather serious subjects in a kind of light way. So my paintings were that, even as they were also very personal about my own unconscious and so on, but they were always I was always interested in that ineffable thing. These questions, the larger questions. Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry.
When is the history moment that this happened? Because you say that somebody described exactly how many were. And I know about people who left because they don't want to live in Paris.
Yeah.
Jewish people who they say that they are afraid of their children to grow there. So when you say 250 people...
Well, this was in mid-18th century Paris, so about 1760. So 1755, 1760 is part of that. The 18th century part of it, and then the other part of it is in contemporary Long Island now. So Masha Edelman's family is contemporary, and Jacob's family in the past is mid-18th century, and that's the part that Buchholz was keeping track of. Yeah.
And why did you decide to write this story? What was that mean to you?
Well, I talked a little bit about the bits of it, but the part of it the reason I chose the 18th century Paris. I knew that I had a reincarnated fly that had to come from somewhere, and I thought, and I was reading it when I directed the film The Private Lives of Pippa Lee, and while I was directing that film, for some reason, every night I was reading a book called At Home with the Marquis de Sade, which was actually written by a friend of mine, and it's a wonderful book. It's mostly about his wife and his mother-in-law, and his various adventures. But that, not so much the Marquis himself, but that life around him and the life of the aristocracy in that period was really interesting to me. And I thought, what if Jacob, at first I thought maybe he could be the valet of the Marquis de Sade. But then I thought, no, because the Marquis de Sade will just take over everything and it'll be a book about the Marquis de Sade. So I thought, no, let him be the valet of like a neighbor of the Marquis de Sade. And so that's what I did. I had him be the valet of a man who would have known perhaps de Sade, or would have been like passing him in the street or gone to the same parties. So and so it was partly that fascination. And then I started, because I knew he was a Jewish fly, I started examining the life of Jews in that period, and it was such an interesting micro-history, as they say, because it was really like it was a very, very difficult history to research. But so that was why I picked that part.
Now, at the risk of exposing my own historical ignorance, You're saying that your fly, as it were, comes from a period which would have been immediately before, not only the time of Marquis de Sade, but before the French Revolution, which
That's
tore
right.
the country apart and affected the whole world, the way the whole world looks at
Right.
the human experience. Are you bypassing that, or do we?
I don't. I know. I actually had to put it more in the middle of the century because Bureau stopped. He lost his job in in the mid 60s of 1760s. So so it's before the French Revolution, and in fact, right before it's. Before Louis XVI, it's not. He hasn't come to power yet, so it's before Marie Antoinette. Yes. He's a historical figure. But I mean, he was a human being in that time, of course. So we get to experience him as a human being, and then later.
Do you have any project now? Do you have any project writing something else?
Yes, I'm writing. I hope to write. There's a novel I would like to write, but I have a film project now, which is my next thing. Well, that's the one that's called Maggie's Plan, and it's a comedy of errors, I suppose, romantic comedy of errors. I think I would describe it as. Yeah.
Any more questions over here? Please.
Advice to aspiring writers, people that have, say, taught literature for 20 years and now their children are grown and gone to college and they can get into have a life. No, a person like that. For example.
Yeah, I would say it's just.
Don't think you got rid of them.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's true too. I think, I think with writing, it's doggedness, isn't it? And it's kind of like just sticking with it every day and being. I think of it as like shining like a flashlight in a basement. You see like, oh, there's that, doll's head over there, and there's this pair of sneakers, and there's that. And you see it. I write with this book. What I did was I wrote what I knew and I could see at the time that I could see it, rather than writing in a line and having the whole thing worked out beforehand, which some people do and some people love that. I don't work like that, and I work. So it's almost like little islands emerging from the sea, and then I would have like shards, and I would allow it to be, not so organized in a sense. And then later I had to have my index cards and I had to be more organized. But at first it was more like I just wrote what I could see. Because otherwise I think it can be, first of all, you can write badly if you write when you don't really see it. And so if you write good passages, even if you write a good passage to the beginning, middle, end, then you start to connect your good passages. I think that is a better way of writing for me, and I think it probably would work for a lot of people. That's what I would say.
Any more questions, folks? We still have a few more minutes. If anyone has any questions, please feel free.
I could read a little passage.
That would be great.
A nice closing
How about
passage?
that?
Okay.
What closing passage? Seeing as we have time. Okay, so Masha has been taking these secret acting lessons. Nobody knows. But she's also dating a guy who's great in her community, but it's become to a point now where she's very confused, and she takes the train from Far Rockaway into Manhattan, thinking that and it's a Friday, but it's early still, and she goes to a bar and gets a Coke, and she runs into her scene partner, Hugh, who's Southern. And they've been working on a scene from Tennessee Williams' play, Orpheus Descending. So he took a sip of his drink. So he said, "What's new?" "I might be getting married soon," she said. There was a breath of silence. "I didn't know you had a fella." "We don't date like you. We date to get married." "Have you been dating?" "I've gone on 6 dates with one man. I need to decide soon." "How can you know so fast?" "My sisters say you just know, but I really don't." Masha, he said, and then nothing. What? She said. He squinted, took a breath, and then shook his head and went quiet. What were you going to say? She asked. I've met a lot of people, but I've never met any other woman with your particular combination of attributes. She looked up at him out of the corner of her glimmering onyx eyes. No? No, he said. She finished her Coke. He offered to buy her a glass of wine. If you're going to play Carol Cutrere, you need to know what a little wine feels like. Hugh seemed untethered, loose on the world. Being with him in this bar, Masha felt time and the facts of her life disappear. Everything was melting into sheer, freewheeling possibility. I can't have wine that isn't kosher, she said. He ordered her a whiskey and ginger ale. She took a sip of the drink. It burned her throat. They talked more and they laughed. Glancing out the window, she lurched forward, checking Hugh's watch, then turned to look outside again. It was dark. Her hand flew to her mouth. What? It's Shabbos. You need to be somewhere? Home. I can't get on the train anymore. The sun set early, she said, as if the sun had tricked her. Not even if it's an emergency? She shook her head. Only to save a life. How long does Shabbos last? Tomorrow's sunset, she said, her head in her hands. No transportation. Well, you're going to have to stay in Manhattan, he said. My mother will die. She slipped off the stool and stood at the door of the bar, looking helplessly into the street through the glass, her thoughts muddled by the alcohol. He walked up to her. You better call your family, he said. I can't use the phone after sunset. I'll call. They won't answer. If they're worried about you, they will. But they don't know about the class or anything. If you call, they'll freak out. How about if I dial your phone and you talk into it? Surely these are extenuating circumstances? Okay, she said. They walked back to the bar and sat down. She leaned into the phone while he held it up to her ear. Pearl answered, hushed, after the first ring. Where are you? Mommy, I'm sorry, said Masha. I'm in town, in Manhattan. What? Why? How did you get there? I've been on the phone to Eli. Did someone? Pearl thought she'd been kidnapped. I took the train. I don't know. I just needed to think. I got on the train and walked around, and now it's too late. I can't get back. Okay, honey, let me ask your father what you should do. Maybe he knows someone there. Hang on. Pearl was trying for her calmest voice, the one she reserved for total inner hysteria. Masha took a sip of her drink and whispered, They might know someone I could stay with. You could stay with us, said Hugh. Masha heard her mother's voice whispering on the other end. How could we not know one person? Mommy, don't worry. There's a lady here, a friend of a lady I met here that will let me stay with her. She's holding my phone. I was so worried about Shabbos, and she dialed for me. I'm sorry, Mommy, but I'll be okay, and I'll see you tomorrow night. Don't worry about me. I'm fine. I just made a mistake, that's all. Night. Will you pay for my Coke, she asked as he hung up, nodding to her purse on the bar. There's a 20 in the wallet. I can't touch money on Shabbos. He pushed the purse back to her and paid the bill. She stared at the bag. Would you mind carrying it? She asked. Hugh couldn't help laughing. I'd be delighted, he said.
Thank you, Rebecca. All right, so a quick reminder for our internet audience at home. There's still time for you to call the number on your screen, purchase a copy of Jacob's Folly. We'll get Ms. Miller to sign that for you, and we'll ship it to wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. Also, a reminder that our live-streamed events are archived. So you can go to the Books and Books website. You could go to the live streaming link, and any author appearance that's been broadcast from here at the store will be saved there for you to watch at your convenience. For those of you here in the house, we have Jacob's Folly as well as Rebecca's previous books for sale at the counter over there. She'll be signing over there at the table to our left. Tonight's presentation has been brought to you in collaboration with the Coral Gables Art Cinema. So I want to thank our introducer, Robert Rosenberg. I want to thank our wonderful interviewer, Jessica Berman, and please give a very big hand to Rebecca Miller. Thank you very much.